They called her a fool. They laughed when they saw her dragging a rusted plow across dead earth under the pale light of the moon. A young woman, alone, planting what looked like worthless pebbles into soil that hadn't held life for 2 long years. The town whispered behind her back at the grocery store. The bank had already stamped her farm with a foreclosure notice. Her mother was buried 6 months in the ground. Her father lay dying in a hospital bed 40 miles away. And the richest man in the county was circling her 300 acres like a vulture, ready to bulldoze everything her family had built for 4 generations. But what nobody in Willow Creek Valley knew was that Delaney Marsh wasn't planting a prayer. She was planting a promise her mother had whispered on her deathbed. A promise buried in a secret her mother had kept for 30 years, hidden beneath the floorboards of an old farmhouse. 6 burlap sacks, crimson seeds, and a handwritten journal that would soon turn the entire agricultural world upside down. By early summer, Delaney wouldn't just save her father's farm. She would break the empire of the man who tried to destroy her. And the whole valley would learn what a grieving daughter can do when she has nothing left to lose. This is her story. The wind in Willow Creek Valley had a memory. It remembered wheat. It remembered the sound of green blades brushing against each other in a July breeze. It remembered laughter from front porches, barefoot children, Sunday potluck dinners on folding tables under the elm trees. But that was a long time ago. Now the wind carried dust. Only dust. Delaney Marsh knelt in front of a small gray headstone at the edge of the county cemetery. The sky above her was the color of old tin. Not a cloud, not a promise, just that endless washed-out blue that had haunted the valley for 2 years running. The headstone was simple, just a name, a date, and below that, a single line her father had chosen. Coralee Marsh. She planted more than she took. Delaney reached out and touched the stone. Her fingers were rough, cracked from the cold. She hadn't slept properly in 6 months. Not since the phone call. Not since the hospital hallway. Not since the cold coffee in the plastic cup. Not since the doctor's voice saying words she couldn't make her brain hold on to. Massive stroke. Nothing we could do. I'm sorry, Miss Marsh. I'm so sorry. I don't know what to do, Mama, Delaney whispered. The wind took her words and carried them somewhere else. Somewhere she couldn't follow. They're going to take everything. The house, the barn, the fields, everything you and Daddy worked for. Because that was the truth of it. The bank had made its move. 45 days. That was all she had left. 45 days, until the auctioneer stood on her front lawn and sold 4 generations of family history to the highest bidder. And she knew exactly who the highest bidder would be. Sterling Vaughn. The name itself tasted like acid, like something metallic she couldn't spit out. Delaney stood up slowly. Her knees ached. She was 27 years old, and her body already felt 60. Grief did that. Grief and worry, and the kind of exhaustion that lived in your bones. She walked back to the pickup truck. It was her father's old Ford. The blue paint had faded to something closer to gray. The passenger seat still had a coffee stain from the morning her mother had ridden in it for the last time. She hadn't been able to clean it. She couldn't. Not yet. Because cleaning it would mean admitting Mama wasn't coming back. Delaney climbed into the driver's seat. Her fingers rested on the steering wheel. She stared out through the cracked windshield at the endless brown horizon. And then she drove home. The road to the farm ran straight through what used to be the beating heart of the valley. Once, this stretch of highway had been lined with silos and mailboxes and painted farm signs. Henderson Family Orchard, 2 Rivers Dairy. The Wilcox Homestead, established 1902. Now most of them were gone. Torn down. Bulldozed. Erased. In their place stood identical corporate signs. Green and gold. Every single one bore the same insignia at the bottom. A stylized letter V wrapped in laurel leaves. Vaughn Development Group. Sterling had been buying up Willow Creek for the better part of 5 years. Quietly at first, then not so quietly. Now brazenly. Openly. With the kind of arrogance only real money could buy. And Delaney knew what he was doing with the land. She'd seen the plans. Because Loretta Beaumont ran the diner in town, and Loretta Beaumont had a niece who worked at the county clerk's office, and that niece had a photocopier and a conscience. The plans showed a resort, a sprawling glass and stone monstrosity called Vaughn Springs, a golf course cutting through what used to be the Henderson wheat fields, a luxury spa where the Two Rivers barn had stood for a century, a private airstrip, tennis courts, a wine bar built on top of somebody's grandmother's grave. He wasn't saving the valley. He was erasing it, turning it into a playground for people who had never worked a day of honest labor in their entire lives. And her 300 acres sat right in the middle of it all, the one holdout, the one stubborn parcel of land Sterling Vaughn couldn't buy, couldn't scare, couldn't drown in paperwork. Until now, Delaney pulled into the long dirt driveway that led up to the farmhouse. The house had been built by her great-great-grandfather in 1898. It was a 2-story Victorian with a wraparound porch and a wooden swing that squeaked in the wind. The paint was peeling, the shutters hung crooked, but it was hers. For now, she parked the truck, climbed out, stood there for a long moment, just looking at the place that had held every important memory of her life. The porch where her mother used to shell peas in the summer, the tire swing hanging from the old oak, the window on the second floor where a young girl had once stared up at the stars, dreaming about someday becoming a scientist. She had almost made it. She had almost done it. 3 years into her doctorate at the university, agricultural genetics, her professors had called her one of the most promising minds in her generation. She'd been on the fast track to a career at the USDA, a real career, a real future, until her mother collapsed in the kitchen making biscuits, until her father's heart started giving out from the grief, until the phone rang, and her whole life changed in the space of a single breath. She'd dropped everything, come home, and she hadn't left since. Delaney climbed the porch steps. The screen door creaked open. Inside, the house smelled the way it always smelled. Coffee grounds, cedar, and something else, something floral and faint. Her mother's perfume, still clinging to a scarf in the hallway closet. She couldn't bring herself to throw the scarf away either. She walked into the kitchen and sat down at the table. Sitting on top of a stack of unopened bills was a manila envelope. Thick, official-looking, stamped with the seal of the Willow Creek County Bank. She'd been staring at it for 3 days, without opening it, because she already knew what it said. But today she had to open it. Delaney took a deep breath, slid her thumb under the flap, pulled out the papers. Notice of foreclosure. Property to be auctioned on the 45th day from receipt. The words swam in front of her eyes. She blinked hard. 45 days. She thought about her father in the hospital bed, about the tubes, about the machines that kept his weak heart beating, about the medical bills stacked so high she'd stopped opening them too. She thought about her mother, gone. She thought about the farm, about the fields, about every single piece of her that would be sold to Sterling Vaughn for pennies on the dollar. And something inside her broke. Not loudly, not with a scream, just quietly, like a small bone snapping in the dark. That was when she heard the tires on the gravel. Delaney stood up, walked to the window, pulled back the curtain. A silver sedan, Sheriff's Department decal on the side. Sheriff Boone. Wonderful. She went to the front door, opened it before he could knock. Boone was a big man, 50s, belly that hung over his belt buckle. He wore a cheap tin uniform and a nervous expression. His hat was already in his hands. Delaney, he said. Sheriff. You get the papers? I got him. He shifted his weight from one boot to the other. You know I don't like doing this. You seem to be doing it just fine. Now, Delaney, how much is Sterling paying you these days, Sheriff? His face went red, but he didn't answer, which was an answer all on its own. He wanted me to pass along a message, Boone said finally. I bet he did. Says he's willing to increase the offer. Fair market value plus 20%. He'll cover the medical bills for your daddy too. Says it's the neighborly thing to do. Delaney let out a laugh. Sharp, short, like breaking glass. Neighborly. Delaney, you tell Sterling Vaughn something for me, Sheriff Boone. You tell him I'd rather burn every board of this house to the ground and salt the earth it stood on than sell 1 square inch of my mother's dirt to that vulture. That's not a very Christian attitude. You want to talk to me about Christian attitudes? You? Standing on my porch in a uniform he paid for? Boone flinched. She kept going. Couldn't stop. Couldn't help it. My mama used to feed you biscuits at that diner every Sunday morning for 20 years. My daddy fixed your daddy's tractor for free when you were a kid. And now you're out here doing errands for a man who wants to bulldoze the church your family got baptized in. Delaney, please. Get off my porch. He opened his mouth, closed it, put his hat back on, turned, walked down the steps. At the bottom, he paused, looked back. There's no shame in sellin', Delaney. The soil's dead. The aquifer's dry. There ain't no miracle comin'. She stared at him, with eyes as cold as January. You keep tellin' yourself that, Sheriff. Maybe someday you'll believe it. He drove away. Delaney stood on the porch until the dust settled. Until the silence came back. Until she was alone again, with the wind and the empty fields and the ghosts. Then she went inside. She didn't go to the kitchen. She didn't go to the living room, where her father's armchair sat empty. She didn't go upstairs to the bedrooms full of memories she couldn't yet face. She went to the attic. Because 2 days ago, going through her mother's things, trying to be brave, trying to be practical, trying to be a grown woman about it, Delaney had found something. A wooden box. Small. Cedar. Carved with a pattern of wheat sheaves and vines. She had never seen it before in her entire life. It had been hidden in the back of a closet, under a pile of quilts, tucked behind an old baby cradle. She had brought it down, set it on the kitchen table, stared at it for a long time, and then she had opened it. Inside was a leather-bound journal, worn, cracked, filled with her mother's tight, careful handwriting. Page after page of notes, diagrams, seed sketches, chemical formulas. And next to the journal, wrapped in a scrap of red velvet, was a brass key. Delaney climbed the attic stairs now. She retrieved the box from where she'd hidden it under the eaves. She carried it back down, sat at the kitchen table, and this time, she began to read. Really read. She'd only skimmed it before. It hadn't made sense. Chemistry symbols. Latin plant names. Dates going back 3 decades. She had assumed it was some kind of hobby project her mother had never mentioned. But now, as she turned the pages slowly, something began to shift inside her. March 14, 1994. Winifred and I isolated the 3rd protein marker today. The taproot response in the trial dish is nothing short of astonishing. If we can stabilize the hybrid across 3 generations, we may have something the world has never seen. Winifred. Delaney knew that name. Dr. Winifred Ashcroft. A botanist. An old friend of her mother's. A woman who had come to Sunday dinner maybe twice in Delaney's entire childhood. Always polite. Always distant. Always with dirt under her fingernails. Delaney kept reading. August 9, 1998. The seeds germinated in the dry chamber. I could not breathe. I sat and cried for an hour. Winifred says we cannot tell anyone. Not yet. The industry will bury us both if they catch wind of it. November 22, 2003. 3rd generation successful. The waxy cuticle is thicker than we predicted. The taproot descends 6 feet in 14 days. 6 feet. In cracked hardpan clay. In 14 days. Delaney set the journal down. Her hands were shaking. Because she knew what her mother was describing. Anyone with even a passing knowledge of agricultural science would know. This wasn't a hobby. This wasn't a hobby at all. This was something the world had been chasing for 100 years. A drought-immune grain. A crop that could grow where nothing else could grow. That could feed people in places that had been abandoned to the sun. Delaney flipped to the middle of the journal. To a section marked with a small red ribbon. Coralee's Promise. That was what her mother had named it. A crossbred strain of hard red winter wheat and a wild desert grass from the highlands. Bred over 3 decades in secret. In a farmhouse basement. By a woman nobody had ever taken seriously. Delaney turned the page again. And there it was. Taped to the very last page. A folded piece of stationery. Her mother's handwriting on the front. 2 words. For Delaney. Her breath caught. She unfolded it slowly. Carefully. As if the paper itself might disintegrate under her touch. My darling girl. If you are reading this, I have gone. And I am so sorry I never got to tell you. I was afraid, you see. Afraid that if I told you, while I was still alive, you'd think I was foolish. A silly old farm wife playing at science. You were always so brilliant, Delaney. So much smarter than me. I didn't want you to see me as small. But now that I'm gone, I need you to know the truth. Winifred and I have been working on something for 30 years. Something we called Coralee's Promise. The seeds are in the vault in the cellar. The key is in this box. Please, my love, please listen to me now. This grain is a miracle. It doesn't need rain. It doesn't need irrigation. It finds water where there isn't any. It grows in earth that has forgotten how to grow. and it is 1,000 times more valuable than gold. It will save the farm. And more than that, my brave girl, it will save the whole valley. I know things are hard right now. I know your father is not well. I know that man Sterling is closing in on all of us. I have prayed about this for many years. And I believe, in my whole heart, that God kept me alive long enough to leave this in your hands. If my daughter is strong enough, and I know she is, the seeds will find their way to her. Trust me one last time, Delaney. Plant them. I love you always. Mama. Delaney sat completely still. The letter trembled in her fingers. The kitchen was quiet. Only the ticking of the old clock above the stove. Only the wind pulling at the loose shutter on the upstairs window. And then she began to weep. Not the quiet kind. Not the kind she had been doing for 6 months. But the raw kind. The kind that comes from somewhere so deep inside you didn't even know it existed. She cried for her mother. For all the years her mother had worked in secret, because nobody would have taken her seriously. For every meal her mother had made, while carrying the weight of a scientific miracle in her chest, and telling no one, not even her own daughter. She cried because she understood, suddenly, that her mother had been afraid of her. Afraid that her daughter, the brilliant one, the one who was going to be a real scientist, would look at what she'd been doing and laugh. Oh, Mama, Delaney thought. Oh, Mama, I never would have laughed. I never would have. But she had never given her mother the chance to find out. She hadn't been home enough. Hadn't visited enough. Hadn't sat at the kitchen table long enough to ask what those calloused hands were building down in that basement. She had been too busy chasing her own future to notice her mother's. Delaney wiped her face with the back of her hand. She stood up, took the brass key from the box, held it tight in her fist, and walked toward the cellar door. The cellar smelled of old timber and cool earth. Delaney descended the wooden steps slowly, one hand on the wall, the other holding a small flashlight. The bulb overhead had been broken for months. She'd never bothered to replace it. At the bottom of the stairs, the cellar opened into the usual clutter. Canning jars her mother had put up years ago. Peaches, green beans, strawberry jam, an old sewing machine, 3 broken chairs, boxes of Christmas decorations nobody had used since 2015. Delaney swept the flashlight beam across the wall. She had lived in this house her entire life. She had played hide and seek down here as a child. She had helped her father stack firewood along the back wall every October since she was 8 years old. She had never once suspected there was a door. But now, with the key in her hand and the letter in her pocket, she began to look. Really look. She moved to the back wall, the one lined with stacked firewood, mostly cedar, some oak. She pulled a log off the top of the pile. Then another. Then another. Her arms ached. Sweat beaded on her forehead. The pile was massive. It took her nearly 40 minutes to clear enough of it away to see the wall behind. And there, just as her mother had said, a door. Steel. Heavy. Rimmed with rubber gasket seals. Painted the same dusty gray as the concrete wall to blend in. She would have walked past it 1,000 times without seeing it. There was a small keyhole. Old-fashioned. Brass. Delaney slid the key inside. Turned. The door made a soft mechanical click. She pulled it open. Cool, dry air rushed out. The temperature inside was noticeably colder than the rest of the cellar. Climate-controlled. Delaney fumbled along the inside wall until her fingers found a light switch. She flipped it, and her whole world tilted sideways. The room was small. Maybe 10 feet by 12. But it was a laboratory. A real, functioning laboratory. Fluorescent bulbs hummed to life overhead, washing the space in white clinical light. There was a stainless steel countertop. Beakers. Microscopes. A centrifuge, dusty but intact. A binder full of hand-drawn diagrams. Charts on the walls showing generations of crossbreeding. A calendar. Photographs of her mother, young, middle-aged, older, standing next to an older woman with wild silver hair. Dr. Winifred Ashcroft. And on the far side of the room, sitting on a low wooden shelf, were 6 burlap sacks. Delaney walked over slowly, reverently, as if she were approaching an altar. She reached out, untied the drawstring of the nearest sack, reached inside. The seeds were unlike anything she had ever seen. They were larger than wheat seeds should be, almost the size of small pumpkin seeds. Their color was deep, dark crimson, almost iridescent. When she rolled one between her fingers, the outer coat felt waxy, Cool. Alive. She held one up to the light. Coralee's promise. Delaney closed her fingers around it, pressed it to her chest, and for the first time in 6 months, she felt something other than grief. She felt purpose. She stood in that little laboratory for a long, long time, reading the notes on the wall, flipping through the binders, piecing together what her mother and Dr. Ashcroft had done over 3 decades of patient, secret, obsessive work. They had used a technique called forced pollination. Manual, slow, unregulated. They had crossed hard red winter wheat with a wild desert grass, whose taproot could descend more than 15 feet in search of water. The result was a plant with 2 extraordinary properties. First, the stalks stored water, massive amounts of water. The waxy coating on the leaves prevented moisture loss even in extreme heat. Second, and more importantly, the root system was aggressive, terrifyingly so. The moment a seed detected even microscopic humidity, it sent a taproot plunging downward at a rate no other grain crop could match. It punched through hardpan clay like it was cotton candy. It reached deep subterranean aquifers that normal wheat couldn't touch. The seeds didn't need irrigation. They found their own water. Delaney read that sentence 3 times. Then she read it again, because it meant something enormous. Something Sterling Vaughn couldn't take from her. Something no drought could kill. But there was a catch. There was always a catch. Her mother's notes were clear on the point. The seeds had never been tested in open soil. Every generation had been grown in controlled greenhouse conditions. Never in a real field. Never in real weather. Never in the kind of hard, cracked, sun-baked ground that stretched across 300 acres of marsh farmland. If Delaney planted them, if she risked everything on this last, wild, desperate bet, and if the seeds failed, she would lose the farm. She would lose her father's chance at proper hospital care. She would lose every last thing she had. But if she didn't try, if she just handed the land over to Sterling Vaughn, then everything her mother had built for 30 years in this tiny room, every quiet hour, every unspoken hope, every prayer whispered over a petri dish, all of it would have been for nothing. Delaney let the crimson seed fall back into the burlap sack. The soft clack of it hitting the others sounded like a decision being made. She turned off the light, closed the vault door, stacked the firewood back into place. She climbed the stairs. She had work to do. The next problem was practical. In Willow Creek Valley, there were no secrets. Loretta Beaumont's diner sat right at the crossroads on Highway 40, and Loretta Beaumont had eyes like a hawk. Every truck that rumbled past the front window got noted. Every out-of-town car got scrutinized. Every unusual movement got repeated over coffee refills within the hour. And Loretta was one of the good ones. Dutch Halloran, Sterling Vaughn's foreman, flew a drone over the valley twice a week, supposedly to check on corporate irrigation pipes. Everyone knew what it was really for. He was keeping tabs on the holdouts. If Delaney rolled a tractor out into her field in broad daylight and started planting, she'd have company within an hour. Sterling would find a reason. Some fabricated ordinance violation. Some invented water conservation infraction. He'd have Sheriff Boone out there confiscating equipment before the first seed hit the ground. Or worse, he'd wait until night. Send Dutch and his boys with sacks of rock salt to sterilize the earth. The corporate playbook was old, and it was dirty, and Delaney had grown up watching it work. She would have to become a ghost. She spent 3 days preparing. She walked her 300 acres barefoot in the daylight, pretending to look defeated, pretending to be a woman thinking about surrender. But really, she was memorizing every dip, every rise, every rock, every rut, because she was going to have to drive that land in total darkness. She practiced in the old barn, started her father's 1978 John Deere tractor, backed it up, turned it, straightened it out, killed the headlights, and did it again by feel. She rehearsed until she could work the clutch and the throttle without looking. She hitched up the old mechanical seed drill, the one her father had inherited from his father. It had no computers, no GPS, no sensors. It was a beautiful hunk of 40-year-old iron that couldn't be hacked or tracked or reported on. It was perfect. On a Thursday afternoon, she drove into town for supplies. Feed store, grocery store, hardware. She kept her head down, talked to no one, bought exactly what a defeated woman would buy: a bag of dried beans, a jug of coffee, some duct tape, At the counter of the hardware store, old Mr. Holbrook rung her up. "How you holdin' up, Delaney?" "Manage in, Mr. Holbrook. You gonna take Sterling's offer?" She let her eyes drop to the floor. Let her shoulders sag. "I'm thinking about it." "That's smart, sweetheart. You start over somewhere new. Somewhere it actually rains. Ain't no shame in it." "Yeah," she said softly. "No shame." She paid, walked out, climbed into her truck, drove home, and smiled the whole way. Because Sterling Vaughn thought he was watching a beaten woman. Sterling Vaughn was watching a wolf. The planting began on a Tuesday in early April. No moon. Sky black as ink. At exactly 1 o'clock in the morning, Delaney rolled the old John Deere out of the barn. She did not turn on the headlights. She did not turn on the running lights. She had disconnected the battery from the small red taillight in the back, so it couldn't accidentally flicker. The night air was frigid, somewhere around 40 degrees. She wore 3 shirts and her father's canvas jacket. Her hands were shaking, not from the cold, from the fear. What if the seeds don't work? What if Mama was wrong? What if I lose everything, and it was all for nothing? She pushed the thought away, poured the first burlap sack into the hopper of the seed drill. The crimson seed slid through her gloved fingers in a soft cascade. She climbed up into the tractor cab, turned the ignition. The old diesel engine coughed, sputtered, roared to life. A plume of black smoke belched into the night air. Delaney threw it into gear and began. Driving in the dark was harder than she had ever imagined. Even with the stars, even with her memory of the land, the horizon was a black soup that swallowed all reference points. She navigated by the jagged silhouette of Beartooth Ridge in the distance. She kept the peak aligned with the exhaust pipe. Every time she reached the far end of the field, she pivoted the tractor by counting the rotations of the wheel. Behind her, the ancient seed drill did its work, dropping the crimson pearls into the dead ground, covering them with the same dust that had refused to grow anything for 2 years running. She worked until 4 in the morning. Then she pulled the tractor back into the barn, wiped it down with a rag so nobody could tell it had been used. Went inside, slept 3 hours, woke up, went to town, sat on her porch, looked defeated. By night, she was a machine. By day, she was a widow's daughter waiting to be foreclosed on. 6 nights she planted. 6 nights. Her muscles screamed. Her back ached in ways she didn't know backs could ache. The dust coated her lungs. She started coughing. So hard one morning she saw specks of red on her handkerchief. She stared at the blood for a long moment. Then she folded the handkerchief, put it in her pocket, kept working. Because there was no other choice. On the 7th night, she finished. The last handful of seeds fell from the hopper into the last stretch of dirt. She turned the tractor toward the barn, killed the engine, sat in the dark cab for a long time, hands still gripping the wheel. She had done it. 300 acres. All of it planted with her mother's impossible dream. She climbed down, legs wobbling, body screaming, something like a laugh trying to work its way up out of her chest. She was walking back toward the house when she heard it. The crunch of gravel on the county road. She froze. No, not tonight. Please not tonight. She dropped to her knees, crawled to the corner of the barn, peered around the edge. A black F-150 was idling at the far end of her driveway. Lights off. 2 men getting out. She recognized the bigger one immediately. Dutch Halloran. He had the build of a former linebacker, neck like a fire hydrant. Buzz cut going gray at the temples. Sterling Vaughn's personal enforcer. The man who did the ugly work that couldn't be traced back to a corporate letterhead. The other man she didn't recognize. Smaller, wiry, carrying something heavy in each hand. Bags. Cement mix. Delaney's stomach dropped. They walked to her main irrigation valve, the one that connected her property to the county water reservoir. The one thing she needed if the drought broke and any real rain came. Dutch produced a pair of bolt cutters, snipped the county lock like it was made of paper. She could hear his voice, low but carrying in the still night air. Cut the main. Pour both bags. Sterling wants to make sure she can't draw a single drop, even if it does rain. Starve her out. Delaney's fists clenched, so tight her knuckles went white. Every part of her wanted to run out there, to scream, to swing something heavy at that big square head. But she didn't move, because she was smarter than that, because she was her mother's daughter. And her mother had always told her, when you're outnumbered, the best weapon is patience. She watched, She watched as Dutch sliced the massive rubber water main with a utility knife. She watched as the smaller man tore open the first bag of quick-setting cement. She watched them dump both bags down her pipe. Watched the smaller man pour a jug of water on top to activate it. Watched Dutch stand back with his hands on his hips. Watched them laugh. They were laughing. Then they tossed the empty cement bags in the back of the truck, climbed in, drove off into the dark. Delaney sat crouched behind the barn for a long time after they were gone. Her water main was destroyed. Her only municipal water source, sealed shut with concrete. It would take a professional crew and thousands of dollars. She didn't have to dig it up and replace it. Any farmer who saw what had just happened would have fallen to her knees. Because a farm without water was a farm that was already dead. But Delaney didn't fall to her knees. Delaney started to laugh. It started low, a small chuckle in the back of her throat. Then it grew, louder, wilder, until she was standing in the dark barn, with her arms wrapped around her middle, laughing so hard tears rolled down her cheeks. Because Dutch Halloran and Sterling Vaughn didn't know. They didn't know what she had planted. They didn't know that Coralee's promise didn't need surface water. They didn't know that traditional irrigation would actually rot the crimson seeds before they had a chance to germinate. They didn't know that the plant her mother had spent 30 years perfecting was designed for exactly this. They had just destroyed her water main, which meant that when her fields eventually turned green and Delaney had to believe they would turn green, she had to believe it because there was nothing else left to believe in. Nobody in Willow Creek Valley would be able to accuse her of siphoning county water. She couldn't have. The main was full of concrete. Sterling Vaughn's own foreman had just handed her the perfect alibi. She laughed until she couldn't breathe, until her ribs ached, until she slid down the wall of the barn and sat on the dirt floor, gasping. Then, slowly, she stood up. She wiped her face. She walked out of the barn, across the yard, up the porch steps, into the kitchen. She poured herself a glass of water from the well pump. The well was on her own property. Thank the Lord, they couldn't touch it, and drank it standing at the sink. Outside, the sun was starting to rise. The first gray light was creeping over Beartooth Ridge. Delaney walked back to the cellar, down the stairs, past the firewood, into the little vault her mother had built. She stood in front of the empty burlap sacks. She picked up the wooden box, opened it, took out her mother's journal. She turned to the last page, to the letter. She read it one more time. Trust me one last time, Delaney. Plant them. I love you always. Mama. Delaney pressed the letter to her lips. I did it, Mama, she whispered. I planted them all. Somewhere in the house above her, the old grandfather clock her father had built with his own hands began to chime. 6 long, slow notes. 6 in the morning. A new day. 38 days until the auction. Delaney closed the journal, closed the box, turned off the light, and climbed the stairs into the first true morning of her real life. Because outside, in 300 acres of dead-looking earth, 6 burlap sacks of crimson pearls were beginning, quietly and secretly, and beneath the notice of every eye in Willow Creek Valley, to send their first tiny taproots plunging downward into the dark, searching for water, searching for a miracle, searching for the promise a mother had left behind. The days that followed the planting were a special kind of torture, because nothing happened. Nothing. Day 1. Nothing. Day 2. Nothing. Day 3. The field stayed brown and dead. Cracked. Silent. 300 acres of what looked exactly like what everyone in Willow Creek Valley said it was. A grave. Delaney walked the fence line every morning at dawn. She squatted down, ran her fingers through the dust, dug down 2 inches, 3 inches, 4, looking for something. Anything. A softening. A dampness. A hint of green. Nothing. She would climb back up to the house, her knees popping, her back a mess of knots. She would stand on the porch with a chipped coffee mug and stare out at 300 acres of quiet, and she would think, what if Mama was wrong? The thought was a small thing at first. A whisper. A speck of dust caught in the corner of her eye. What if the seeds are dead? What if the vault got too cold last winter? What if Winifred and Mama miscalculated? What if 30 years of work in a basement was just a widow's daydream? She tried to push the thought away. She tried to remember her mother's letter. Trust me one last time. She tried to feel her mother's presence in the wind. But grief does something cruel to a person. Grief makes doubt sound louder than faith. Grief makes the silence of a field sound like the answer to a prayer that was never really answered. Day 7. Nothing. Day 9. Nothing. Day 11. Delaney drove into Cedar Bend to visit her father at Mercy Regional Hospital. The drive took an hour and 40 minutes. She used the time to try and rehearse cheerful things to say. Weather things, neighbor things, anything but the truth. Because Ambrose Marsh couldn't take the truth. Not now. Not in the state he was in. The nurse at the desk gave her a small, tight smile. He's had a hard morning, honey. Is he awake? In and out. Delaney walked down the hallway. Her boots echoed on the linoleum. Room 214. She paused at the door, took a breath, fixed her face, went in. Her father lay in the bed, with a plastic tube in his nose and a heart monitor beeping somewhere behind his head. He was smaller than he used to be. That was the thing that broke her every time. Ambrose Marsh had been 6'2" and 190 pounds. A wall of a man who could pick up a bale of hay under each arm and walk them across a barnyard whistling. Now his wrists looked like a boy's. His eyes fluttered open. He saw her. His face softened. Delaney girl. Hey, Daddy. You brought me something. Coffee. They ain't letting me have coffee no more. I know. I brought it for me. He almost laughed. It came out as a wheeze. She sat down in the chair beside the bed. Took his hand. It was cool. Too cool. How's the farm? He whispered. Fine, Daddy. Don't lie to your father. I'm not lying. Your mama used to make that same face when she lied. Right there. That little twist at the corner of your mouth. Delaney looked away. I'm handling it, Daddy. I promise you. I'm handling it. He was quiet for a long time. His eyes drifted toward the ceiling. You know, he said, your mama had all kinds of secrets. Delaney's breath caught. What do you mean? Kept things in that cellar. Books and jars, and I don't know what all. Told me it was best if I didn't ask. And you never did. Not once. Your mama was the smartest person I ever knew. If she said don't ask, I didn't ask. He turned his head, looked at her. You go a skin though, Delaney girl. You go looking. If she left something behind, she left it for you. Delaney squeezed his hand tighter. Daddy, shoo. His eyes were already closing. Get on home, sweetheart. Feed the chickens. Say your prayers. And tell that old dust in them fields that Ambrose Marsh ain't dead yet. She sat with him until he was asleep. Then she stood, kissed his forehead, walked out into the parking lot, and she sat behind the wheel of her father's old Ford for a very long time. Because she couldn't stop crying, and she wasn't going to drive an hour and 40 minutes home while she couldn't see the road. Days 12 through 23 passed in a slow, cracking blur. The bank sent a second notice. Certified mail. Delaney signed for it without opening the envelope. She put it on the kitchen table on top of the first notice. Dutch Halloran drove past her property line 3 times in a single week. Slow, deliberate, making sure she saw him. The old grandfather clock in the hallway seemed to tick louder every day. She barely slept. She barely ate. She was down to 1 meal a day, and half of it was cold beans out of the can. Her jeans hung off her hips. She kept the door bolted. She kept her father's shotgun leaning against the wall beside her bed. She started praying at night. She hadn't prayed since her mother's funeral. But she prayed now. God, if you're listening, please, just one green blade. Just one. I'm not a skin for a miracle. I'm just a skin for a sign. Day 24. 6:40 in the morning. Delaney was in the kitchen, standing at the sink, trying to force down a piece of dry toast, because her stomach hurt too bad for anything else. She heard tires on the road out front. Then she heard tires screech. Then she heard a voice screaming her name. Delaney, Delaney, get out here. She dropped the toast, grabbed the shotgun, ran, because in her mind, at that moment, only one thing could make somebody scream that loud on a country road at dawn. Sterling Vaughn had done something. Sterling had burned the barn, or shot her dog, or God knew what else. She flew out the front door in her socks, the shotgun already coming up to her shoulder. But when she got to the top of the porch steps, she stopped dead. Because it wasn't a fire. It wasn't Sterling. It was Loretta Beaumont, standing on top of the hood of her rust-colored pickup truck. And Loretta was pointing. Not screaming exactly. Weeping. Pointing and weeping. Her free hand pressed against her mouth. Delaney looked where Loretta was pointing. And she forgot how to breathe. The field. Her field. 300 acres of what had been dead cracked dirt yesterday afternoon was green, not pale green, not tentative green, not the shy green of new spring shoots. It was a violent, aggressive, impossible emerald green. An ocean of it. Row after row of thick, jagged stalks, already inches high, glinting in the morning sun like they had been oiled. The rising light caught the waxy coating on the leaves and made the whole field look like it was made of polished glass. Delaney's legs gave out. She sat down on the top porch step. The shotgun slid from her fingers and clattered on the wooden boards. "Oh my God," she whispered. "Oh my God. Oh mama. Oh mama." Loretta was climbing down from the hood of the truck now, making her way up the driveway on her sturdy 68-year-old legs. Loretta Beaumont was a stout woman with iron gray hair and hands that had flipped a million short-order eggs. She wasn't a woman who cried. Not since her husband passed in '09. But she was crying now. She reached the porch, climbed the steps, sat down beside Delaney, wrapped one strong arm around her shoulders. "Baby," Loretta said. "Baby, what did you do?" "I planted something." "What did you plant?" Delaney couldn't answer, because she didn't have the words, because she was still trying to breathe. "Delaney, your water line. Everybody in town knows Dutch tore up your water line 3 weeks back. It hasn't rained in 108 days. How in the name of the good Lord above did anything grow?" Delaney turned her face toward Loretta, tears streaming down both cheeks. "Life finds a way, Loretta. Life. My mama found a way." Loretta stared at her, and then Loretta pulled her in tight and held her, while Delaney cried the biggest tears she had cried since the day her mother collapsed on the kitchen floor. By noon, the road was blocked, because word had gotten out. Loretta had called 2 people at the diner. Those 2 people had called 5 each. Those people had called their sisters and their nephews and their bowling league and their bridge club and their pastor. By 10 in the morning, there were 15 cars parked along Highway 40. By 11:40, by noon, more than 100 people stood along the fence line of the Marsh property, hands gripping the wire, faces pressed forward. Some of them had cameras. Some of them had phones. Most of them had nothing at all except their own 2 eyes and a kind of wonder that had gone out of Willow Creek Valley a long, long time ago. Pastor Ezra Whitfield came in his old brown suit. He walked past the crowd without speaking to anyone. He climbed over the low wooden fence like a boy. He walked out into Delaney's field until he stood chest deep in the tall emerald stalks. He turned in a slow circle. He took off his hat. He fell to his knees. And Pastor Whitfield, a man who had preached at the funerals of 47 Willow Creek residents in the last 5 years alone, a man who had never once shown a public tear even at the graveside of his own wife, put his face in his hands and wept. Delaney watched him from the porch. She knew what he was doing. She knew he was praying. And she knew what name was on his lips, because Coralee Marsh had sat in his front pew every Sunday morning for 30 years. Because Coralee had brought him casseroles when his wife was dying of the cancer. Because Coralee had been the kind of woman a small-town pastor never forgets. Loretta stood next to Delaney on the porch. She had brought coffee out for the crowd. She had already made 3 pots. "They ain't leavin'," Loretta murmured. "I don't want him to." "You don't. I want witnesses." Loretta looked at her sharply. "Baby, what are you planning?" "I ain't planning nothing, Loretta. I'm just making sure Sterling Vaughn can't move a single thing on my property without 100 people watching." Loretta's mouth curled up into something almost like a smile. "Well, look at you," she said. "Look at you, Delaney Marsh." They stood there together in silence for a long time, watching the field ripple in the wind. Watching a valley remember it used to be alive. It took Sterling Vaughn exactly 6 hours to arrive. At 2 minutes after 6 in the evening, 3 black SUVs rolled up to the front gate of the Marsh property. The crowd of onlookers parted for them slowly. Reluctantly, the lead SUV door opened, and Sterling Vaughn stepped out. He was in his early 50s, tall, silver at the temples, the kind of custom-tailored gray suit that costs more than most families in Willow Creek made in a year. He wore polished leather shoes that were entirely inappropriate for a dirt driveway. His face was carefully arranged into an expression of neighborly concern. Behind him, Dutch Halloran, and 2 men in suits carrying briefcases. Sterling walked to the fence. Delaney was already there. She was sitting on the hood of the old John Deere tractor. her boots resting on the front fender. Her father's shotgun laid across her lap. She had put on a clean shirt, braided her hair, washed her face. She wanted him to see her clearly. Sterling stopped at the wire. He looked out over the field. He looked at the tall emerald stalks. He looked back at Delaney. His face didn't move, but behind his gray eyes, something shifted. "Delaney," he said. His voice was warm. "Practiced. I have to say, I am astounded." "I bet you are. That's quite a crop you've got there." "Sure is. Would you mind telling an old neighbor what kind of irrigation system you've built?" "I ain't built any irrigation system." "Now, Delaney, I ain't drawn a single drop of water, Sterling. And you know why?" "Do I? Your boy Dutch there filled my main line with concrete 3 weeks ago." The crowd on the fence line went absolutely still. Dutch stepped forward. His face was already turning red. "That's a lie. I ain't touched her line." "Then you won't mind Sheriff Boone digging it up and checking for fingerprints," Delaney said, staring at Dutch. Never breaking eye contact. "Sheriff Boone answers to me. I know he does, which is why I already sent pictures to the state police. Captain Prescott, out of Region 4. Real nice man. He seemed real interested." Dutch's jaw worked. Sterling laid a hand on his foreman's arm, without looking at him. "Dutch, let me handle this." Dutch stepped back, but he didn't stop glaring. Sterling turned to Delaney again, and for the first time, the neighborly mask slipped an inch. Just an inch. But she saw it. She saw the thing underneath. Because Sterling Vaughn was, at his core, a rancher's son. His granddaddy had homesteaded 160 acres over in the next county before selling out to a chemical company in 1972. Sterling was a real estate developer now, a millionaire, a predator. But he had wheat in his blood the same way she did, and he was looking at her field the way a man looks at treasure. "What are you growing, Delaney?" he asked. Softly, almost reverently. "You wouldn't recognize it. Try me. It's not for sale, Sterling." He didn't move for a long moment. Then he pulled out a business card, slid it through the wire fence, let it drop into the dust at her feet. "When you're ready to talk," he said, "you call that number. Day or night. I'll pay you $3 million for a 5-acre parcel and the rights to whatever hybrid you're working with." The crowd gasped. $3 million. 5 acres. Delaney didn't even look at the card. "Get off my fence, Sterling." He smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. It never did. "You know I don't take rejection well, Delaney." "Neither do I." He looked at her for a long second more. Then he turned, walked back to his SUV, climbed in. The convoy rolled away in a cloud of yellow dust. The crowd of townspeople watched them go. And then, slowly, they began to cheer. Not loud, not celebratory, just this low, satisfied sound that rolled through the fence line like distant thunder. Delaney climbed down from the tractor, picked up Sterling's business card, held it between 2 fingers. She walked over to Pastor Whitfield, who had come out of the field and was standing near the gate, still wiping his eyes. She handed him the card. "Would you do something for me, Pastor?" "Anything, child." "Would you take that card home and burn it? Right in your fireplace. Say a little prayer over it while it's burning, if you don't mind." Pastor Whitfield took the card, folded it carefully, put it in his front shirt pocket. "It'd be my honor, Delaney girl." Meanwhile, 30 miles away in a glass tower in the city, Sterling Vaughn sat in his office pouring 3 fingers of scotch with a hand that was almost steady. He set the crystal decanter down, picked up the tumbler, walked to the window. Below him, the city glittered. The river, the bridges, the endless traffic. He looked past all of it, toward the west, toward the valley he had been buying up for 5 years, toward the little parcel of green that had suddenly appeared in the middle of his empire like a slap across his face. He pulled a small silver frame off the corner of his desk, turned it over in his hands. The photograph inside was faded. 1977. His father, a young Wallace Vaughn, standing in front of a small farmhouse, with a young pretty woman on his arm. His mother, both of them long gone now. His father had died broke and broken in that same garage in 1989. His mother of grief, less than a year later. Because his father had been a farmer, and farmers were fools, and the world had chewed his father up and spit him out in pieces. Sterling had promised himself something over that grave when he was 17 years old. He had promised himself that he would never be a fool. He would never be the one being chewed up. He would be the one doing the chewing. He would build something his son, William, could inherit. Something so big and so permanent it could never be taken away. Not by Drought. Not by banks. Not by anything. That was what Vaughan Springs was. A monument. A fortress. A legacy. And this young woman, this 27-year-old, with mud on her boots, and her mother's crazy dead woman project in her back pocket. She was going to destroy it all. Sterling took a long, slow sip of scotch. Not on my life, sweetheart, he murmured. Not on my life. He set the glass down, picked up the phone. The next morning, Delaney tried to buy fertilizer. She drove into town to the Willow Creek Agricultural Supply, the only farm store within 40 miles. She walked in, nodded at the clerk, wandered to the back, where the fertilizer bags were stacked. The clerk followed her. Miss Marsh. Yeah. I can't sell you anything. She turned around. What? Your credit line's been canceled. My credit line ain't been canceled. I just paid it off in March. Well, it's canceled now. New ownership. New policy. New ownership? The clerk looked at her miserably. Vaughan Development bought us out 2 weeks ago. Delaney felt something cold settle in her chest. And the new policy? No credit. Cash only. And we can't sell to anybody the boss deems, quote, a business risk. Am I a business risk? He couldn't look at her. Yes, ma'am. How much for a pallet of ammonium sulfate? Cash. I'm real sorry, Miss Marsh. Sale denied. She stood there for a long moment. Not moving. Not blinking. Then she nodded once. That's all right, son. You tell your new boss I said hey. She walked out, climbed in her truck, drove home. But she wasn't panicked. Not really. Because Coralee's promise didn't need commercial fertilizer either. That was in the journal too. The desert grass genes in the plant produced its own natural nitrogen fixation. And more importantly, its waxy coating carried a mild alkaloid that was toxic to most pests. Sterling was trying to starve a plant that had been designed from the very first seed to survive starvation. Delaney almost felt sorry for him. Almost. She spent the rest of that day walking her fields. Just walking. Just looking. The stalks were already knee-high. The taproots, she knew, were already down 4 feet and pushing deeper. She sat down in the middle of a row of the emerald plants. Just sat down, cross-legged in the dust. She talked to her mother. You would have loved this, Mama. You would have loved to see it. All of it. Above her, the sun blazed. But down here, at the base of the stalks, it was almost cool. The plants were holding their own microclimate, cooling the soil around them, sheltering the earth. You built something beautiful, Mama. You really did. That night, Delaney slept for 6 straight hours for the first time in 6 months, which meant she was deep in her bed at 2:01 in the morning when the sound came out of the sky. She sat straight up. Something was flying low. Very low. And the engine had that unmistakable whine. A crop duster. Delaney was on her feet before her mind was even fully awake. She grabbed her jacket, her boots, and a small marine flare gun she had bought at a sporting goods store in Cedar Bend last week. Because she had been expecting this. She had been waiting for this. She ran off the porch, ran through the yard, across the driveway, toward the northern edge of the property, where the field met the open air. Above her, the plane was already banking. She saw it silhouetted against the stars. Small, white, no navigation lights, which was illegal in itself. She heard the hiss of the spray nozzles opening. She smelled the sharp, acrid stench of a high-grade defoliant, the kind of chemical herbicide that would burn a wheat crop to ash before sunrise. Sterling wasn't just trying to starve her. He was going to poison her. Not tonight, Delaney thought. Not tonight, you snake. She loaded the flare gun with a red magnesium cartridge. She did not aim at the plane. She was not going to give Sheriff Boone the pleasure of arresting her for attempted murder. She aimed straight up, directly into the flight path, about 100 feet ahead of where the plane was moving. She pulled the trigger. The flare exploded in the sky like a small red sun. For one blinding, blistering second, the entire valley was bathed in scarlet light. The stalks below turned the color of blood. The mountains lit up. Every window in the farmhouse reflected the burn. And the pilot, whose night vision had been finely tuned to fly a black plane through a black sky at 2 in the morning, was suddenly and totally blind. Delaney watched him panic. She watched the plane yank hard to the left. The engine stalled for a terrifying second, sputtered, caught again, And then, in a desperate move to lose weight and regain altitude, the pilot did exactly what she had known he would do. He dumped the load. Every gallon of that toxic herbicide poured out of the plane in a wide sweeping arc. Not onto Delaney's fields, onto Sterling's. The pilot had already banked hard away from her property. He was directly over the Vaughn-owned cornfield that lay just south of her property line. And every drop of that death rain came down onto Sterling's own soil, contaminating 300 acres of prime commercial farmland, poisoning it for years. Delaney stood in the red glow of the falling flare. She lifted her phone up, pointed it at the retreating plane, zoomed all the way in. She got a beautiful, clear shot of the tail number. The next morning, at 7 a.m. sharp, that video was sent to the regional office of the Environmental Protection Agency. Attached to it was a 2-page letter from Delaney's newly hired attorney, a former state prosecutor named Margaret Kellerman, who had a personal grudge against Sterling Vaughn going back a decade. By noon, federal investigators were swarming Sterling's private airfield. By 4 in the afternoon, the pilot had been detained and was singing to anyone who would listen. By 6, the EPA had officially opened a criminal investigation into Vaughn Development Group. Sterling watched the local news that evening from his office. He drank an entire bottle of scotch by himself. He put his fist through a piece of drywall. And then, when the rage had burned itself out, and only the cold predator remained, he made a phone call. Because if he couldn't kill her with poison, he was going to kill her with paperwork. A week later, on a bright Tuesday morning, Sheriff Boone's cruiser pulled up to the farmhouse. Flanked by 2 black corporate SUVs, Delaney stepped out onto the porch, wiped grease off her hands. She had been tuning the engine of the combine harvester, getting it ready. Boone climbed out of his cruiser. He wouldn't look at her. Behind him came Sterling's lead attorney, a slick man in a pinstripe suit, and behind him came another man, younger, wire-rimmed glasses, white polo shirt with the Vaughn Development logo embroidered over the heart. He carried a stainless steel case. "Morning, Delaney," Boone mumbled. She said nothing. The attorney stepped forward with a leather folio. "Miss Marsh, my name is Robert Ainsley. I represent Vaughn Development Group. This is a federal injunction." "Explain it." Ainsley smiled. Slick, practiced. The kind of smile that had bankrupted a lot of small farmers in a lot of small towns over the years. Vaughn Development is currently in the late stages of developing a proprietary drought-resistant hybrid known internally as Genesis 4. Recent aerial surveys of your property have revealed startling similarities between our intellectual property and the crop currently growing on your land. You've never seen my crop up close. Given the proximity of your farm to our test acreage across the valley, it is our legal position that cross-pollination occurred. You are, in effect, harboring stolen genetic material. Delaney laughed. Not loud, just a small, dry laugh. My mother spent 30 years of her life in a basement developing that plant. Sterling's laboratory has been open for what? 6 years? That is for a judge to decide. In the meantime, we have obtained an emergency order to collect biological samples for DNA analysis. If those samples match our proprietary markers, your entire crop will be seized and destroyed by federal marshals. There it was. The corporate death blow. Because even if she eventually won the lawsuit, the legal process would take years. The bank would foreclose in a matter of days. She would be vindicated in court long after Sterling Vaughn had bulldozed her fields. The younger man in the white polo stepped forward. "Miss Marsh," he said. His voice was more nervous than the attorney's. "I'm Dr. Warwick Blackwood. I'm Mr. Vaughn's head of research. We require 10 complete stocks, root to tip, for genetic analysis." Delaney looked at him. He wouldn't quite meet her eyes. She looked at Boone. Boone's hand was resting on his service weapon, a subtle threat. She looked out, over her 300 acres of impossible emerald crop. For a long moment, there was no sound in the world except the wind rustling through the golden-tipped stalks. The plants were nearly waist-high now, almost mature. The grain heads were forming, deep crimson, heavy, beautiful. She smiled. It was a strange smile. It wasn't the smile of a woman being cornered. It was the smile of a woman who had already thought of this. "Be my guest, gentlemen." Ainsley blinked. "Excuse me. I said be my guest. Take all the samples you want. Take 20 stalks. Take 100. But you're going to want to be real careful of the destroyed irrigation lines. Wouldn't want anybody to trip. The attorney and Blackwood exchanged a look. Boone shifted uncomfortably. Blackwood stepped past her cautiously, walked out into the field, selected 10 stalks, snipped them at the base, roots and all, sealed them in the specimen containers inside his stainless steel case. The whole time, Delaney watched him, with the calmest, most peaceful smile she had worn in her life. When they had loaded everything into the SUV, Ainsley turned to her. There was a small hesitation in his eyes now. "Miss Marsh, this crop will be legally frozen by federal court order in 72 hours. If our analysis confirms cross-contamination, and we believe it will, you will not be permitted to harvest." "You already said that, Mr. Ainsley. I want to make sure you understand what that means for your financial situation." "Oh, I understand just fine." The convoy drove away. Loretta Beaumont came running up the driveway. She had been parked on the shoulder 100 yards down, watching the whole thing. "Delaney," she gasped. "Baby, what did you just do?" Delaney went back to the combine, picked up the grease rag, started wiping her hands. "I did exactly what I planned to do, Loretta. They're going to reverse engineer that plant. They're going to find one little match. Just one. And they're going to claim the whole thing. They're not going to find a match." "How do you know?" Delaney looked up. Her eyes were bright. "Because my mother didn't just cross wheat with grass, Loretta. She built something the world has never seen. Something that ain't in any patent office. Anywhere." Loretta stared at her. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying Sterling just paid to have my invention certified as brand new. In writing. By his own laboratory." Loretta's mouth fell open. Delaney smiled again. And this time it was a slow spreading smile. A smile that started in her eyes and worked its way down. "He just handed me the patent papers, Loretta. He just doesn't know it yet." 48 hours later, in the silent multi-million-dollar laboratory of Vaughn Development Group, Dr. Warwick Blackwood stared at the readouts on his mass spectrometer with mounting dread. He had run the genetic sequence 3 times. 3 times. And every single time, the result was the same. Impossible. Terrifying. He was still staring at the printouts when Sterling Vaughn walked into the lab. Sterling was carrying a glass of scotch. He was smiling. "Well, Warwick, give me some good news. Give me my injunction. Let's burn her out." Blackwood swallowed hard. His hands were trembling. "Mr. Vaughn, speak up, son. There is no match to Genesis 4. Then find something else. Find a synthetic enzyme, a protein marker, anything. I don't care if you have to forge the data. We need a legal hold on that crop within 24 hours. "You don't understand, sir. Explain it to me." Blackwood took a breath. He held up the printout. "It's not that I can't find your markers, Mr. Vaughn." "Then what?" "It's that I can't find anything recognizable. This plant, it doesn't match any wheat variety in the global genome database. It doesn't match any grass. It doesn't match any hybrid on record. Anywhere." Sterling went very still. "Explain." "Coralee Marsh didn't just crossbreed wheat with a desert grass, sir. She created an entirely new genus. Legally, under the Federal Seed Act and USDA classification standards. The plant Delaney Marsh is growing does not exist in law. It is not wheat. It is not grass. It is not any registered crop." Sterling stared at him. "Then patent it ourselves. File the paperwork tonight. We have the samples." Blackwood shook his head. "We can't." "Why not?" "The seeds are dead." "What?" "The stalks are fine. The grain heads are intact. But the seeds inside will not germinate. Not without a very specific curing compound. Coralee Marsh built a biological lock into the strain. Second-generation reproduction requires a proprietary chemical process to activate. And that compound isn't in our samples." He looked up. His face was pale. "Delaney Marsh holds the only copy of the formula. Somewhere. In her mother's notes. She is the sole gatekeeper of an entire new species of grain." Sterling Vaughn stood there for a long moment. The glass of scotch in his hand was slightly trembling. He had been outplayed. Utterly. Completely. By a 27-year-old girl in a farmhouse. By seizing samples for a patent lawsuit, he had just legally documented that Delaney's crop belonged to nobody but her. He had done her paperwork for her. He poured the rest of the scotch down the sink. He looked out the window toward the west, toward the valley, toward the little green square of impossible life sitting stubbornly in the middle of his empire. "Get out, Warwick." "Sir." "Get out." Blackwood left. Sterling picked up his phone, dialed a number. "Dutch. It's me. We're out of legal options. Get the boys ready. We're doing this the old way." That same night, at almost the exact same hour, Delaney Marsh sat in the passenger seat of Loretta Beaumont's pickup truck as they drove the hour and 40 minutes to Mercy Regional Hospital in Cedar Bend. Delaney hadn't wanted to go. She was exhausted. She was scared. She was watching the calendar tick down toward foreclosure, with a mixture of hope and dread that made it hard to eat. But Loretta had insisted. "Your father needs to hear it. From you, baby. He needs to know what you did. Before something happens. Just in case." Just in case were the three most terrible words in the English language, when your father was in a hospital bed with a failing heart. Delaney had swallowed hard and gotten in the truck. When they arrived, the nurse gave her a strange look. "He's been a skin for you all day, honey. Is he all right?" "He's more awake than he's been in weeks." Delaney walked down the hall. Room 214. She opened the door. Ambrose Marsh was propped up in the hospital bed. His eyes were bright, clear. His color was better than she had seen in 3 months. He turned his head, saw her, smiled. "There she is. Hey, Daddy. Come sit down, honey." She sat down in the chair beside the bed, took his hand. "You look good today." "I feel good. Feel like myself for the first time in a long time." "That's wonderful." He was quiet for a moment. His eyes searched her face. "Delaney girl." "Yes, Daddy. You found the vault." She froze. "How did you?" "Your mama told me you would. She always said, if it ever gets bad enough, our girl will find it. She'll find it, and she'll know what to do." Delaney's throat closed up. "Daddy." She knew, sweetheart. She knew for a long time she wasn't going to get to see it through. So she made a plan. And her plan was you. But she never told me. She never. She was afraid, Delaney. Of what? Ambrose's eyes filled with tears. She was afraid you would think she was silly. A little farm wife, with big dreams and dirty fingernails. She thought her brilliant scientist daughter would look at what she'd been doing in that basement and see a fool. Delaney's own tears came now. Oh, Daddy, no. I told her 100 times. I said, Coralee, that girl loves you. That girl would never think you were silly. But your mama had this quiet way of doubt in herself in the dark. Same as her mother. Same as her mother's mother. He squeezed her hand. She prayed about it every single night for 30 years, Delaney. Every night. Kneeling by the bed. Every night for 30 years. About the seeds? About you. She prayed that God would keep her alive long enough to finish the work. And if he wouldn't, if he took her before the work was done, then she prayed her daughter would be strong enough to finish it herself. Daddy, she used to say to me at night, Ambrose, if our girl is strong enough, the seeds will find their way to her. Delaney couldn't breathe. She put her face down against her father's hand, and she wept. She wept for her mother. She wept for herself. She wept for the years she had spent thinking she needed to prove something to a woman who had already believed in her more completely than anyone in the world. She wept until her father's hand was wet with her tears. Delaney girl. Yes, Daddy. You listen to me now. She lifted her head. Yes, Daddy. This ain't your fight. This is her fight. You are finishing what your mama started. And the whole hosts of heaven are lined up behind you. Every single one. He touched her cheek. Now you go home. And you finish it. She stood up, kissed his forehead, walked out into the parking lot, with Loretta following behind her. She stopped beside the truck. She looked up at the sky. It was full of stars. I'm not doing this alone, am I, Mama? Loretta wrapped an arm around her shoulders. Squeezed tight. No, baby, Loretta said. You never were. They drove home in silence. Delaney watched the highway lines disappear beneath the headlights of the truck. Somewhere behind her, in a glass tower in the city, Sterling Vaughn was already loading his last desperate weapon. Cans of diesel fuel. Drip torches. A truckload of hired men. He had lost the legal war. He had lost the economic war. He had lost the chemical war. He had one card left, and he was going to play it in the dark. But Delaney Marsh was already home, already waiting, already praying, already ready, because her mother had prayed for this day for 30 years. And Delaney Marsh was her mother's daughter. Delaney Marsh did not sleep that night. She sat on the porch swing, with her father's shotgun across her lap and a mug of black coffee gone cold in her hand. The stars wheeled overhead. The crickets sang. And in her mind, a single sentence played on a loop. He's coming. She didn't know when. She didn't know how. But she knew Sterling Vaughn the way a rabbit knows a hawk. She knew the way his kind of man responded to losing. And she knew he had exactly one card left to play. Fire. It was the oldest weapon in the agricultural playbook. The dirtiest. The most final. A spark. A dry field. A convenient wind. And a woman's whole life could turn to ash in 20 minutes. The insurance would call it a tragic accident. The sheriff would call it a mystery. And Sterling Vaughn would call the bank at 9 in the morning and buy her burned-out land for pennies on the dollar. So Delaney did not sleep. She had already made her preparations. After the crop duster, after the herbicide, after the fake lawsuit, Delaney had made a phone call of her own. Not to Sheriff Boone. Sheriff Boone was Sterling's man. To Captain Prescott, State Police, Region 4, a man who had personally chewed out Sterling Vaughn twice in the last decade over environmental violations. A man with sharp eyes and no love for developers. Delaney had sent Captain Prescott every piece of evidence she had. The video of the crop duster, the photographs of the destroyed water main, the affidavit from Loretta Beaumont, the medical report of her own bloody handkerchief. Every dirty little breadcrumb. And Captain Prescott had listened. He had believed her. Captain Prescott had grown up in a small farming town 2 counties over. His own father had been forced off his land by a developer just like Sterling Vaughn back in the 80s. It was personal. So Captain Prescott had made a promise. You call me the minute you see so much as a suspicious pair of headlights on your road, Miss Marsh. I've got a whole unit on standby. 2 counties away. 20 minutes response time. And Miss Marsh, yes, sir. We will be quiet. We will be careful. We will catch him red-handed. Delaney had thanked him. Hung up. Then she had done something else. She had gone to Pastor Whitfield. She had sat in his little parsonage office. And she had told him everything. The seeds. The vault. Sterling. The threats. The lawsuits. The crop duster. All of it. Pastor Whitfield had listened without interrupting, his hands folded on his desk. When she was done, he said one thing. How many people do you need? Pastor. How many men and women? From my church. From your fence line. How many people do you need standing between you and that man when he finally comes? She stared at him. I don't know if I can ask that. You are not asking, child. I am volunteering. He stood up, walked around the desk, put his hand on her shoulder. Coralee Marsh sat in the second pew for 30 years. She brought casseroles to every single funeral. She sang in the choir with a voice like an angel. When my Ruth was dying, your mother sat by her bed every Wednesday night and read the Psalms out loud. Every Wednesday. For 11 months. His eyes filled. You do not stand alone in Willow Creek Valley, Delaney Marsh. Not while there is one Bible-thumping old fool with 2 working knees left in my congregation. Delaney cried. Because she couldn't help it. Because she was tired. Because someone had finally said the thing she needed to hear. That was 6 days ago. Since then, Pastor Whitfield had quietly organized what he called the prayer patrol. Every night at 10 o'clock, for pickup trucks pulled into a hidden spot behind the barn. For crews of 3 people each. 12 townsfolk. All volunteers. All armed with nothing more than flashlights, walkie-talkies, and their own faith. They walked the perimeter of Delaney's property in shifts. 2 hours on, 2 hours off. Every single night. They watched. They waited. They prayed under their breath. And they had reported everything to Captain Prescott through Delaney. Every truck that slowed on the county road. Every drone that buzzed the fence line. Every set of tire tracks that appeared in the ditch by morning. Sterling was watching them. But they were watching him back. Now it was the night of May the 10th. 3 days before the foreclosure deadline. 2 days before the harvest. The stalks in Delaney's field stood chest high. The grain heads were heavy. Deep crimson. Ready. 2 days. 2 days between Delaney Marsh and a miracle. Sterling knew it too. His own drone had flown over that morning and confirmed it. Dutch Halloran had reported it. Every farmer in 3 counties had been driving out to look at Delaney's fields, with tears in their eyes for a week and a half. He was running out of time. At 2:14 in the morning, Delaney's radio crackled. She sat up straight on the porch swing. It was Marvin Callahan on the other end. retired auto mechanic, 69 years old, assigned to the southeast corner of the property. Marvin's voice was low. Steady. Delaney, we got 3 trucks. Coming in dark on the South Ridge Road. Killed their lights half a mile back. How many men? Count in. Count in. I got 6, 8, 10. 10 men, honey. 5 on foot, 5 in the cabs. Weapons. They got something shiny. Metal cans. Big ones. Drip torches. Just like she thought. Delaney keyed the mic. Everybody. Everybody hold your positions. Do not engage. I'm calling Prescott now. She picked up the burner phone. Dialed. Captain Prescott picked up on the first ring. Marsh. They're here. 10 men. South Ridge. Drip torches. On our way. 20 minutes. Captain. Yes, ma'am. Don't spook him. I want them to strike the match. I want them caught in the act. There was a pause. Understood, Miss Marsh. We will be silent. We will be waiting. She hung up. She walked into the house, set the shotgun down against the wall, went to the kitchen, poured herself a fresh cup of coffee, sat down at the table. Her hands were steady. She was surprised by that. She had expected them to shake. She had expected her heart to be trying to punch its way out of her chest. But somehow, in this moment, she felt something like calm. Because this was going to end tonight. One way or another, it was going to end tonight. She said a small prayer, not for herself, for the 12 townspeople hiding behind the fence line, with flashlights and faith. For Marvin Callahan. For Loretta. For Pastor Whitfield. For her father, asleep in a hospital bed 40 miles away. For her mother, who had planted this whole moment 30 years ago in a basement laboratory. Watch over us, Mama, she whispered. Watch over us tonight. Dutch Halloran struck the first match at 2:31 in the morning. He stood at the edge of the southern brush line, his face lit orange by the storm match. His 4 hired men behind him, with their own drip torches uncapped and glinting. He tilted the spout of his torch, let a glob of burning diesel fall onto the dead mesquite brush at the property edge. It flared instantly. Flames leapt 3 feet into the air. The dead brush caught like tinder. Dutch grinned in the firelight. He stepped forward, toward the emerald wall of Delaney's crop, ready to drag the fire straight into the stalks and let the wind do the rest. Except the fire didn't spread the way it should have. Dutch tilted the drip torch again, poured burning diesel directly at the base of the crimson stalks. The fuel burned furiously in the dirt, scorched the outer bark black. But the plants themselves did not catch. Dutch frowned. He poured more. The stalks began to hiss, to bubble, to emit a thick white steam that rose in the cold night air like fog. What the hell? Dutch muttered. He turned to his men. Get up here. Somebody hit these things directly. Aim for the middle, the heads. His men obeyed. For drip torches, for streams of burning fuel, all poured directly onto the crop. And still, the plants would not burn. Coralee Marsh had not just bred a drought-immune grain. Coralee Marsh had bred a plant that was, at its core, a living water column. The thick waxy cuticle, the dense saturated stalks, the moisture pulled up from 12 feet below the surface. All of it made Coralee's promise nearly fire retardant. The intense heat of the diesel was only boiling the sap inside the stalks, making them vent steam, not catch flame. Dutch stood there staring, his mouth open. This ain't natural. That was when the lights came on. Every one of them. At once. From the north. From the west. From the east. From the south. From the highway. From the ridge road. From every direction at once. 30 pairs of headlights. Blazing. Red and blue strobes started spinning. A voice boomed through a bullhorn. Amplified. Steady. Terrifying. Drop the torches. Hands where we can see them. Now. Captain Prescott. 22 state troopers advanced from the tree line with rifles up. Dutch's 4 men dropped their torches instantly, threw their hands in the air. One of them fell to his knees in the dirt, sobbing. Only Dutch himself stood frozen, torch still in his hand, fire still burning. Delaney Marsh stepped out from behind the wall of cruisers. She was not alone. Loretta Beaumont was beside her, holding an iron crowbar. Old Mr. Hallbrook from the hardware store was on her other side. Baseball bat. Behind them stood 32 men and women from Willow Creek. Farmers who had lost their land. Wives who had lost their husbands to bankruptcy. grandfathers who remembered when the valley was still green, widows who had watched their grandchildren move to the city because there was no work. They stood in the firelight, silent, grim, beautiful. Pastor Whitfield was in the middle of them, holding his old family Bible open in both hands. Dutch Halloran looked at the crowd. His face went white. He dropped the drip torch. It hit the dirt with a soft, heavy thud. The flame flickered and died. Down, Prescott commanded. On the ground. Face down. Hands behind your head. Dutch went down. The state troopers moved in. Cuffs came out. The 4 hired men were led away. Then Dutch, his big hands ratcheted behind his back, his face pressed against the cold dirt. Delaney walked over to him. She looked down at the man who had cut her water, poisoned her fields, tried to burn her crop. He glared up at her from the dirt. You think this changes anything, girl? Sterling's got lawyers. Hill. Dutch. What? Tell Sterling I said thank you. His face twisted. For what? For proving my crop is fireproof. She smiled. Just a little. You just added another 0 to my patent valuation. The state troopers hauled him up, marched him toward the cruisers. The crowd from Willow Creek did not cheer. They stood in the firelight in absolute silence, and some of them removed their hats, and some of them wept, and Pastor Whitfield began to sing very softly. Great is thy faithfulness, O God my Father. One by one, the townspeople joined him. Delaney did not sing. She turned, looked at the eastern horizon. The sky was just beginning to gray. 2 days until the foreclosure deadline. 1 day until harvest. It was going to be the longest 48 hours of her entire life. Because Sterling was wounded, not dead, and wounded men were dangerous men. The morning of May the 12th broke crisp and bright and cloudless. The kind of morning her mother used to call God's kind of morning. Perfect, golden, alive. Delaney was in the combine harvester by 5:45. Her father's old boots on her feet, her mother's yellow scarf tied around her hair. She sat in the glass cab, both hands on the wheel. She had never operated a combine before. She had studied every manual her father owned for 2 straight weeks. She had climbed inside the cab 100 times over the last month to practice the switches, the levers, the pedals. She had watched videos on her phone late at night by the light of the kitchen table. She was terrified. She turned the key. The massive diesel engine coughed, sputtered, roared. The vibration went straight up through her spine. She engaged the threshing cylinder. It began to spin. She released the parking brake, eased the machine forward. The combine rolled into the crimson field. The reel began to turn. The stalks began to fall. She watched her mother's plants disappear into the belly of the machine. Inside, she knew, the grain was being violently separated from the chaff. Sorted, cleaned, deposited into the massive holding tank behind her. She drove for 20 minutes. Slow, careful, learning the feel of the giant machine. Then she glanced back, over her shoulder at the tank. She stopped the combine. Because the grain pouring in. The grain pouring in was a color she had never seen anything living produce. A deep, rich, almost blood-dark crimson. Each kernel was fat, perfect, heavy. The yield monitor on the dashboard was climbing, so fast she thought the sensor had broken. This can't be right. She rebooted the display. The number climbed higher. This can't be right. She rebooted it again. Same number. Higher. Oh, mama. She started to laugh. She was laughing and crying at the same time in the cab of a 50-year-old combine at 7 in the morning on the most important day of her life. Because her mother had done it. Her mother had really, truly, actually done it. She kept harvesting, row after row, by 11 a.m. She had already filled the first grain truck. Loretta's brother David was waiting with the second truck, then the third, then the fourth. By noon, they had 4 fully loaded semis lined up in her driveway. The plan was simple. David and 3 other volunteer truckers would drive the loaded semis 50 miles down Highway 40 to the regional grain elevators in Cedar Bend. The elevators would test the grain, weigh it, and wire the payment to Delaney's bank by 5 p.m., at which point Delaney would immediately transfer the money to Willow Creek County Bank, which would satisfy her mortgage, cancel the foreclosure, and save the farm. She had 8 hours. She had 4 trucks. She had 50 miles of open highway. It should have been a straight run, except it wasn't. At exactly 12:22 p.m., David's CB radio crackled to life inside the cab of the lead truck. David, David, hold your position. Do not roll. Do not roll. It was Mr. Holbrook, sitting in his old sedan up at the county line, monitoring the highway. David keyed the mic. Holbrook, what's going on? Highway 40 is blocked. Both lanes. Concrete barriers. Just went up 2 hours ago. Blocked how? County Road Commission. Emergency bridge inspection. Sheriff Boone's out here in person tinning every commercial truck around. David sat behind the wheel of his semi. His hands went cold. That's the only paved route out of the valley. I know it is, son. How long is the inspection? Sheriff says minimum 48 hours. David closed his eyes. 48 hours. Delaney had 8. He picked up the CB and switched to Delaney's frequency. Delaney, come in. She had been in the middle of dumping the 5th load of grain when her handset squawked. David, go ahead. Highway 40 is blocked, honey. Concrete barriers. Fake bridge inspection. Boone's tinning us back. Delaney climbed down from the combine. Slowly, she stood in the dust with the handset pressed to her ear. Repeat that, David. Highway 40 is blocked. Her heart. Oh no. Oh no, no, no. She looked around, frantic, because there was no other paved road out of the valley, because the only other route was the old logging roads up over Beartooth Ridge. And those roads would snap the axle of every one of her semi-trucks trying to carry a full load of grain up the switchbacks. Sterling had cornered her. He hadn't been able to burn her crop, so he was going to trap it, right there, sitting in trucks on her driveway, until the foreclosure deadline passed at midnight, at which point every kernel of Coralee's promise became legal property of the bank, which meant it became legal property of the buyer at auction the next morning, which meant it became legal property of Sterling Vaughn. Delaney stood there in the dust, the handset in her hand. She started to laugh, which surprised her. There was nothing funny, but she laughed anyway, because she had already thought of this. She had thought of this a month ago. She keyed the mic. David. Yeah, honey. Get all 4 trucks turned around. We ain't going to the highway. Delaney, there ain't no other road. I didn't say we were talking a road. What? Turn him around, David. Get him pointed north, and meet me at the old railway spur behind the barn in 1 hour. Silence on the line. Then, Delaney Marsh, what did you do? You'll see. A month ago, when Delaney had realized that Sterling had bought the fertilizer store and could easily buy the road commissioners, when she had realized how many ways Sterling could still stop her at the last possible moment, Delaney had done something. She had liquidated the very last thing her father owned. A small life insurance policy her mother had taken out on him decades ago. $12,000. Delaney had not spent it on legal fees. She had not spent it on farm equipment. She had spent it on a permit, a federal permit, filed with the Federal Railway Commission, for a private short-term lease of the abandoned Willow Creek Railway spur, the rusted line of iron that cut through the northern edge of her property, the tracks that hadn't been used in 15 years, the tracks that everyone had forgotten about, because everyone moved everything by truck now. Everyone except Delaney Marsh. Federal right-of-way superseded every single county road closure, every fake bridge inspection, every bribed sheriff. Sterling could block her paved roads all he wanted. He couldn't block a federal railway. At 3 p.m., a bright orange freight locomotive appeared on the horizon. It came down the old spur from the north, its horn blaring, 20 empty hopper cars trailing behind it. The tracks had been overgrown with briars and wildflowers, but the iron beneath was still solid. And the engineer knew his business. The locomotive rolled to a screeching halt right at the edge of Delaney's northern fence line. Every man and woman in Willow Creek Valley who could hold a shovel had already assembled. Pastor Whitfield's prayer patrol, Loretta and her diner crew, farmers who had come from 3 counties over just to see the harvest. They surged forward with grain augers and portable conveyors. They set up a bucket brigade the likes of which the valley had not seen since the barn raisings of a century ago. The 4 grain semis pulled up to the tracks. The augers started spinning. Crimson wheat began pouring from the semi-trailers into the empty hopper cars, ton after ton after ton. The whole scene was covered in golden dust and the smell of diesel and the shouting of 200 people working together for the first time in a decade. At 3:40 p.m., Sterling Vaughn was sitting in his office watching a live drone feed of Delaney's farm. The blocked highway had made him smile. He had poured himself a fresh scotch. He had leaned back in his chair. He was going to own it all by midnight. Except then his phone rang. His lawyer. Panicking. Sterling, turn on the news. Turn on the news right now. Sterling grabbed the remote. Flicked the wall-mounted television. The regional news helicopter was circling Willow Creek Valley. But it was not focused on the blocked highway. It was focused on the railway spur, where a bright orange freight locomotive was being loaded with what looked like several $1 million in grain. Sterling stood up, so fast his chair fell over. No. He whispered it. No, 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 no. The tracks were decommissioned. That was federal jurisdiction. He had checked. His lawyers had checked. There was no way. There was absolutely no way. Except there was. Delaney had filed the paperwork weeks ago. Perfectly legally, bypassing every single lever of local power Sterling had spent 5 years buying. Sterling sprinted out of his office, down the elevator, to his car. He drove 90 miles an hour toward the valley, but by the time he got to the crossing, it was too late. The locomotive was already pulling out, its heavy steel wheels grinding against the rails. 20 hopper cars now full of crimson grain, its horn blasting one last triumphant note that echoed off Bear Tooth Ridge and rolled through the whole valley. Sterling stood beside his car in a cloud of diesel exhaust, watching everything he had planned for turn into a train disappearing over the northern horizon. The elevator confirmation came at 4:52 p.m., 8 minutes before the bank closed for the day. Delaney was sitting on the porch of the farmhouse. Loretta was beside her. Pastor Whitfield was beside her. Mr. Holbrook was beside her. Her burner phone rang. She put it on speaker. The elevator operator's voice was shaking. Miss Marsh. Yes, sir. I don't know what to say to you, ma'am. What's the number, sir? The bidding started before your grain even hit the scales. I got calls from Chicago, from Kansas City, from Minneapolis, from 2 international buyers I have never even heard of. What's the number? Ma'am, it is more money than has ever passed through my scales in one afternoon, in my entire career. He named a figure. Delaney closed her eyes, because it was enough. It was enough to pay off the bank many times over. It was enough to pay off her father's medical bills. It was enough to build a life. More than that, it was enough to do the thing she had been quietly planning for weeks. She stood up. Sir. Yes, ma'am. Wire it to the Willow Creek County Bank. Right now? Reference the Marsh mortgage account. Yes, ma'am. It's already going. At 4:58 p.m., the wire hit. The Marsh mortgage was paid in full. Delaney's foreclosure was officially canceled. The farm was hers. Loretta grabbed Delaney and pulled her into a hug, so tight it lifted her off the ground. Pastor Whitfield fell to his knees on the porch and started praying out loud in a voice that trembled with joy. Mr. Holbrook took off his hat and pressed it against his heart. And Delaney Marsh, 27 years old, stood on the porch of the house her great-great-grandfather had built and cried into the shoulder of her mother's best friend. Because she had done it. She had planted her mother's seeds in the dark, and from the dust, she had grown a miracle. The next morning, Delaney drove to Cedar Bend Hospital. She walked into room 214 with a bouquet of wildflowers she had picked from her own field. Her father was awake, sitting up, his color better than she had ever seen it. She sat beside the bed. Daddy, Delaney girl. I did it. He smiled. The tears rolled down his cheeks silently. Your mama is dancing, sweetheart. Your mama is dancing up there right now. She read to him from her mother's journal. The very last page. The letter. The whole thing. She read it slowly. Both of them crying. Both of them laughing. When she was done, he squeezed her hand. What are you going to do now, honey? She smiled. Daddy, I'm going to do something bigger. That Sunday, in Pastor Whitfield's little white clapboard church, Delaney Marsh stood up in front of the whole town. Every farmer who had lost land to Sterling Vaughn in the last 5 years was there. Every widow whose husband had bankrupted and died of the strain. Every grandparent whose grandchildren had moved to the city. Delaney stood at the front, beside the pulpit. She was wearing her mother's blue dress, the one Coralee had worn to Sunday service every week for 30 years. She looked out at the congregation. Y'all know my mama, she began. Y'all know she was the quietest woman in this valley. Y'all know she brought casseroles and sang in the choir, and sat right there in the second pew every Sunday for 3 decades. What y'all did not know, what I did not know, what nobody knew, was that my mama was also one of the greatest agricultural scientists this country ever produced. And she worked, in secret, in a basement, because the world did not think a woman like her had anything worth saying. Her voice cracked. She pushed through. My mama left me something. She left me seeds. She left me a plant that can grow where nothing else can grow. And she left me instructions to save the whole valley with it. So that's what I'm gonna do. She lifted a leather binder, held it up so everyone could see. This here is the charter for the Willow Creek Agricultural Cooperative. I have transferred $50 million from yesterday's harvest into a trust. Under this cooperative, the room went absolutely still. I am off-airing every one of you, every single one of you, who lost land to Sterling Vaughn, an equal ownership share. Somebody in the third row started weeping. Delaney kept going. We are going to buy back every acre Sterling stole, and we are going to do it together. And I am going to provide the seed, free of charge, and the curing compound, free of charge. And nobody in Willow Creek Valley is ever going to lose a family farm to a corporate suit again. The whole church stood up. Pastor Whitfield could not preach a sermon. He was crying too hard. The organist just started playing Amazing Grace, and the whole congregation sang it together until the wooden rafters rang. 2 weeks later, on a bright Tuesday morning, a rusted mud-splattered 1978 Ford pickup pulled into the polished circular driveway of the Willow Creek County Bank. Delaney Marsh could have bought a fleet of luxury vehicles by then, but she had found a deep poetic satisfaction in driving the same truck Sterling Vaughn had once mocked from behind his tinted glass. She walked into the bank in her father's canvas jacket and her mother's yellow scarf, her attorney Margaret Kellerman on her right, Captain Prescott of the state police on her left. Inside the boardroom sat Sterling Vaughn. He was a ghost of himself. His custom suit hung loose. His face was gray. His eyes were bloodshot. He had aged 10 years and 6 weeks. Across from him sat Richard Ellsworth, the regional bank president, who had spent the last 2 weeks trying not to look Sterling in the eye. Richard, please, I need 90 days. 90 days on the margin call. Once the EPA fine is settled, I can. Sterling stopped mid-sentence. The door had opened. He turned. He saw Delaney. He froze. What is she doing here? Richard, get her out. This is a private. Miss Marsh is not trespassing, Sterling. Delaney walked around the table. She set a thick-bound legal document down directly in front of Sterling Vaughn. At 8:22 this morning, she said quietly, the Willow Creek Agricultural Cooperative purchased your entire toxic debt portfolio directly from this bank. Every one of your Willow Creek Valley mortgages. Sterling stared at her. You bought my debt. I own your mortgages, Sterling, which means I am the one foreclosing on you. Sterling's face went white. He stood up, so fast his chair fell backward. I have lawyers. I will tie this up in court for a decade. I will bleed you dry. Captain Prescott stepped forward. He set a small audio recorder on the table. Actually, Mr. Vaughn, we won't be going to civil court. Dutch Halloran signed his plea deal at midnight. He gave us everything. Text messages from your private servers, voice recordings, detailed testimony about the water main, the crop duster, the arson attempt. Prescott held up a folded document. I have here a federal warrant for your arrest. Racketeering, conspiracy to commit arson, environmental crimes, attempted destruction of agricultural property. Sterling took 2 steps backward. His shoulders hit the wall. He looked at Richard Ellsworth. Ellsworth looked at his hands. He looked at Captain Prescott. Prescott looked back at him with the flat professional stare of a man who had been waiting a very long time for this exact moment. He looked at Delaney. His lips trembled. What do you want? Delaney opened the legal binder. She turned to the last page. She uncapped a fountain pen. She held it out to him. I want the deeds. Every acre of Willow Creek Valley you have acquired in the last 5 years. Signed over to the Willow Creek Agricultural Cooperative. Free and clear. You'll destroy me. You destroyed yourself, Sterling. He looked at the pen, then at her. And in exchange? In exchange, the cooperative absolves your debt. And Captain Prescott has agreed to let your lawyers negotiate a surrender to federal authorities tomorrow morning instead of dragging you out of this bank in front of the press this afternoon. It was total surrender. Unconditional. Sterling stared at the pen for what felt like an hour. Then he picked it up. His hand shook, so hard he could barely sign his own name. But he signed, page after page. Every deed, every mortgage, every contract. 70% of Willow Creek Valley, legally transferred back to the people he had stolen it from. When the ink dried, Delaney gathered the papers, slid them into her leather satchel. She turned to leave. But at the door, she paused. She reached into the pocket of her jacket. She pulled out one small crimson seed. She walked back to the table, set the seed down in front of Sterling Vaughn. He looked up at her, confused, broken. What is this? Delaney's voice was very soft. You can start over from this, Sterling, if you want to, when you get out. He stared at the seed. She continued. My mama used to say. She used to say every hard heart is just a seed that never learned how to open. Maybe yours will. She looked at him for a long moment. There was no triumph in her eyes. There was no hatred. There was something quieter, something bigger, something a woman only earns after she has walked through a fire and come out the other side still willing to plant. Goodbye, Sterling. She walked out. She did not look back. 1 year later, the valley had come back to life. Delaney Marsh stood on the porch of the farmhouse, a cup of coffee in her hand. The autumn wind moved through her hair. Below her, 300 acres of Coralee's promise stretched out in every direction. Golden, heavy, ready for a second harvest. That was going to be even bigger than the first. Beyond her fence line, farm after farm had come back. The old Henderson land, the Two Rivers Dairy, the Wilcox Homestead, all of them owned by the Willow Creek Cooperative, all of them planted with Coralee's promise. Loretta Beaumont's diner had expanded twice. It now served meals to a steady stream of agricultural tourists and scientists. Mr. Holbrook had opened 3 more hardware stores. David Callahan managed a brand new cooperative rail depot that shipped thousands of tons of Coralee's promise across the country every week. Sterling Vaughn was serving a 7-year sentence at a federal white-collar facility out west. His corporation had been dismantled by his own furious board of directors and sold off in pieces. Delaney had heard, through Margaret Kellerman, that Sterling had asked, from his cell, for permission to write her a letter. Delaney had said yes. The letter had come 6 months later. It was 1 page long, handwritten, not particularly eloquent. It said, in essence, that Sterling had been reading, that he had been thinking about his father, that he had planted the crimson seed in a little pot in his cell window, that he wasn't sure if it would grow, but that he was watering it every morning, just in case. Delaney had cried when she read it. Then she had written a 2-line response. Keep going, Sterling. Water it every morning. Even the hardest hearts can open. She had signed it Coralee's daughter. Now, on this autumn evening, she walked down the porch steps and out into her own field. Her father was in his wheelchair on the porch behind her. He had come home from the hospital 8 months ago. He was still weak, but he was here. He was here. Delaney walked out to the edge of the property, to the small family plot where her great-great-grandfather was buried, and her great-grandmother, and her grandfather, and her grandmother, and her mother. She knelt down beside the small gray headstone. She placed a bundle of crimson wheat against the marker. The setting sun turned the whole valley gold. Mama, she whispered. I did what you asked. I finished the work. And Mama, she closed her eyes. I found myself along the way. The wind moved through the wheat behind her, rustling, whispering, like 1,000 small voices saying the same soft thing over and over. Yes, yes, yes. Delaney stood up, brushed the dust from her jeans, turned back toward the farmhouse, toward her father waiting on the porch, toward the golden, endless valley her mother had left behind, toward the whole rest of her life. She walked home, and in the crimson fields around her, another generation of Coralee's promise stood tall in the wind, their taproots buried deep, their heads heavy with grain, still growing, still finding water, still keeping the promise a mother had made in a basement laboratory, alone, in the dark, 30 years before the world was ready to believe her. The end.